The night sky above the alien world was not dark. It was a fever of red fire and falling metal. The kind of sky that told every living thing to run. And yet there was nowhere to run. The cities trembled, towers cracked, and sirens cried until they sounded like living creatures losing breath. He stood on a balcony that shook with every blast. A young communications officer with gray skin and steady hands that did not feel steady anymore. He watched the horizon where the defense shield had once glowed like a calm moon, now broken into drifting shards, and he felt a small, sharp thought in his chest. A thought that said maybe this is the end. He pushed it away because duty was heavier than fear. Below him the streets boiled with people, elders gripping children, shopkeepers dragging crates of memory and money that suddenly meant nothing. Soldiers guided crowds through smoke and falling ash. And in the choking air the smell of burned power lines and pulverized stone mixed with a bitter taste that stayed in the throat like guilt. He moved back into the control room where the glass walls rippled with heat and the consoles flickered like candlelight in a storm. The old commander stood over the central table with her jaw locked and her eyes refusing to blink. She did not shout. She spoke slow and clear. Send the call. Send it now. Send it everywhere. Her voice cut through panic the way a bell cuts through fog. But still it carried a quiet fear that only those closest could hear. Technicians bent over panels, keys clicked, antenna towers woke and groaned, and the officer took his station. He opened the channel to the deep sky array that slept under the polar ice. 1,000 copper mouths pointed at the stars. He looked at the status board. Most lights were dead. Some blinked with weak pulse. He felt the room tilt as another strike landed beyond the ridge, and for a second all screens went black, a single heartbeat of darkness. Then they returned with lines across them. Like scars, he steadied his breathing and remembered the script he had learned as a child. The distress words that were meant to be simple so even a trainee could say them while running or bleeding. He set the gain to maximum. He set the repeat to infinite. He marked the send field for every frequency they could still touch. And he hesitated, not because he did not know what to say, but because he knew what it meant to say it. It meant admitting that they could not hold, that they had been broken, that the sky had become a mouth that only ate. He pressed the key anyway, his thumb firm and gentle like pressing a sleeping child's hand, and the message flew, first as a whisper through the local dish, then as a shout through the relay spines, then as a scream from the ice array into the invisible ocean between stars. The words were old and clean. This is Cash Prime. We are under attack. We require immediate assistance. Civilian centers compromised. Defenses failing. Coordinates. Attached, any friendly hearing this, please respond. He set the message to cycle, and the console began to hum, a humble, hopeful sound in a room thick with smoke and crushed silence. Outside another building folded into itself and the blast wave came through the glass as a ripple that cut cheeks and drew bright lines of blood across tired faces. Someone cried out. Someone swore. Someone prayed to a god of the deep wind. The commander did not move. She watched the sky through slashed glass and said, "Now we wait," and waiting felt like its own kind of battle. He thought of his mother's garden on the north slope, little blue leaves that smelled of rain. He thought of his brother who had left to work in the ore belts and never wrote back. He thought of how the city had looked in winter, roofs powdered in white, children sliding down the public steps on metal trays. He pushed these quiet pictures away because they made the present louder. The invaders moved like the sea. They did not come to speak, they came to erase. Long black craft circled the city. Thin beams reached down and cut roads like threads, then fanned out to find the water lines and the power hearts. Communications towers died one by one like old singers losing voice. The officer checked the array again. The deep sky output was steady, but the repeaters were failing fast. He diverted what power he had to the polar site. He told the system to keep speaking even if the city went dark. He put the message into the backbone of the planet, into the ice and stone, so that even if nobody was left to listen, the sky would still hear. On the far side of the table a medic wrapped a bandage around a young guard's arm while the guard clenched his teeth and stared at the ceiling where dust fell like grey snow. The medic kept the wrap clean and tight, and in that small careful work there was a strange form of courage. Another blast rattled the foundation and a light fixture swung until it tore free and shattered on the floor with a tired sound. The commander finally looked at the officer and asked, "Do we have a return?" He shook his head. Not yet, and the words felt heavy, heavier than the console under his hands. Silence answered the call. But not an empty silence. It was a full silence, a bowl filled to the edge. A silence that carried all the weight of stars that were too busy or too far or too afraid. Time began to feel soft, minutes stretched, then snapped, then stretched again. He could measure only by the depths of lights on his board and the pattern of tremors that meant the enemy had turned a new block into glass. A junior tech at the back, no more than a child in truth, asked in a small voice, "Will anyone come?" And no one answered because to answer would be to claim knowledge none of them had. The officer thought of the old stories told in school, stories of beings who lived on hotter worlds, planets the scholars called Deathworlds because the storms could tear mountains. And the animals hunted with tools, worlds where life learned to be sharp and fast just to rise from the mud. They said those people were not evil, but they were different. They measured kindness in strange weights. They showed mercy only after they had removed the threat forever. The scholars had argued for 100 years about whether it was wise to call such people friends. No one had decided, because no one had truly met them. The officer had laughed at those stories once. He did not laugh. Now, the commander said, "Try the narrow beam, give it a tighter song." He tuned the message to a thin needle and sent it out on a frequency that old charts called almost myth. The console clicked like ice breaking in spring. The systems coughed power into the sky, and again the room returned to waiting. It was a new kind of cold. The kind that sits behind the ribs and watches the door. The officer looked to the west where the hills rose like folded fabric. There had been a listening post out there before dawn. He could not see it now, only a smear of black smoke that lay flat against the ground. A runner burst into the room, armor cracked, helmet gone, eyes too wide. The enemy had landed in the industrial quarter. Heavy units moving toward the central spine, he said, and his voice shook like someone holding a note too long. The commander nodded as if someone had reported a missing spoon, calm and sad, and told him to help with the southern evac routes. The runner nodded and left, leaving a fine dark line of blood where his boot had split. The officer checked the deep array. Once more, the output held, the message kept traveling, and in a strange moment of clarity he imagined the signal itself moving through the dark, passing lonely rocks and sleeping comets, sliding along the edges of gravity like a swimmer keeping to the shore. He imagined it touching the attention of machines that listened to the cold and the heartbeat of dust. He imagined it crossing the path of signals from 1,000 other worlds, traffic of joy and trade and quiet science, and still it went on, simple words, a hand held up in a storm. The city groaned, the floor trembled, a wall cracked and showed a thin bright line of day outside where day no longer meant warmth. And then, for a moment, there was a sound on the channel, not a word, not even a clear tone, just a brush of something that was not their own reflection. Everyone in the room turned, even those who had been bandaged, even the medic with bloody gloves. Hope is a dangerous thing because it makes the heart run ahead of the feet. The officer leaned in. He adjusted the gain. He cut everything but the deep beam. He whispered to the console like it could hear him. "Come on, come on, come on." But the brush of sound became static and then silence again. His throat hurt with a swallow he could not complete. The commander placed a hand on his shoulder. "Steady and warm and heavy. Keep sending," she said, and he did. He sent and sent. He thought maybe the signal needed something more than coordinates and numbers. Something like a story, something like a reason. But the script was all they had. The enemy reached the edge of the central district. The room lights went dim as power rerouted to the shield around the hospital. Someone laughed once, short and angry, at the idea that they could still protect anything. But still they tried. They were not proud people. They were living people, and living people try even when trying looks like a joke. The officer's hands began to ache from holding the same position. He shook them out and flexed his fingers. He thought of the deep array buried in ice. How the engineers had told him that under the ice there was older ice and under that there was stone that remembered fire. And he wondered if the planet itself could feel them asking for help. If the mountains could hum with their signal and send it on. It was a foolish thought and he allowed it because it made the waiting softer. A faint tremor came through the console again, a pattern this time. Not speech. Not yet, but rhythm. The hairs on his arms lifted as if the room had filled with weather. He looked at the commander and she looked back and neither spoke because speech might break it. The pattern held, a low beat like a far drum, then another, then a rising hiss that cut through static as clean as a blade. The technician at the far console cried out that the polar array had just received a handshake from outside the local net. An external lock, impossible. The word fell and broke on the floor. Because it was not useful, the officer opened the channel wider, invited the handshake, offered their throat to whatever teeth were on the other side because that was the only choice left. The pattern shifted, became structured, carried edges, carried intention. He felt his chest tighten as lines of unknown script rolled down the side display. The translator scrambled and tripped, then caught one piece, then another, and a single line stamped itself across the main screen in a slow, heavy font that looked like it had been carved rather than typed. It said, "Message received, hold position." The room exhaled in a broken way, not joy, not yet, only the relief of a starving animal that has seen water. The commander closed her eyes for one heartbeat, then opened them. Her face red like stone reading the sea. "Hold position," she repeated, as if tasting the words for poison. Outside the enemy changed shape, as if sensing some new current. Their ships tightened the ring around the city. Beams crossed the sky in clean white lines. The defense grid failed completely and the hospital shield flickered like a dying candle. The officer sent a return, identified their species, their numbers, their wounds, and attached more precise coordinates. He kept the language simple. He kept it honest. He did not promise they could hold. He did not ask for more than what the screen had offered. "Hold position. Copy," he said, and his voice shook only at the end. Another line came, this one shorter, this one like a hammer, arrival time classified, maintain broadcast, secure civilians, do not signal enemy, do not engage further than defense. His mouth went dry at the word arrival. He turned to the commander and she nodded once. The room bent itself toward a new kind of work. Things that had seemed useless now mattered. The evacuation routes were changed to move people underground. The remaining gun platforms were ordered to cover approaches but not to chase. The medics stood taller and called for more blankets and water because if there was going to be an arrival then there had to be survivors to receive it. The city outside kept breaking. But inside the control room something steady took hold. The officer set the message to keep transmitting a calm heartbeat. A pulse that said we are here, we are alive, we are waiting, and the silence that returned from the stars did not feel empty anymore. It felt like breath held by something large. The enemy craft paused at the valley mouth as if listening to a sound only they could hear. The ground shivered in a new way, not from the enemy's fire, but from somewhere deeper. Far above the ruined shield the clouds peeled back as if a hand had spread them. The officer did not yet see anything, only the strange clean circle in the sky where smoke would not stay. He did not let hope run. He kept it on a short leash. He kept sending the call that had become a promise to himself and to the people below. "This is Cash Prime. We are under attack. We require assistance." Coordinates attached. Message repeating, and in that rhythm he found a simple prayer he could live inside. The consoles hummed. The commander stood like a tree that had learned to survive storms by bending at the right time. And the officer stared at the circle in the clouds and told himself that silence was not the same as absence. That sometimes the universe took one extra breath before it spoke. And he believed it. He believed it because believing was the only tool he had left that did not need power or metal or permission. The city waited with him, the stars listened, and far out beyond the smoke and fear, something old and hard had turned its face toward them. The circle in the sky did not close, it grew wider, as if the smoke itself was afraid to cover it. The alien officer stood at his console, every muscle aching but refusing to stop sending the signal. His voice replayed again and again through the cold dark. "This is Cash Prime, under attack. Coordinates attached. Please respond." Each repeat felt like the heartbeat of a wounded animal that still wanted to live. The commander paced slowly, her boots crunching on broken glass. She was not pacing out of nerves. She was pacing to keep herself awake. Because exhaustion was now the enemy almost as much as the invaders outside. The city shook with new strikes, deep thunders that rolled through the bones of every building. Children underground pressed their hands to their ears. Elders whispered comfort, but their eyes were too wide to match their words. The invaders had surrounded the central districts. Their machines were tall and spidery, walking through fire like shadows come alive. Each step cracked the ground and made the air taste of iron. Every defense tower left standing was slowly picked off, one by one, until their once proud shield grid was nothing but shattered pylons. Inside the control room the officer adjusted the receiver again. He leaned forward, sweat running down his neck. Then he froze. The static was no longer alone, there was rhythm again. Firmer than before, a pulse steady as marching boots. He raised his hand to silence the room. The hum shifted into a deep tone that carried weight. The translator struggled, failed, then produced 3 words that glowed across the main screen. Hold, position, confirmed. A breath went through the room, sharp and collective. The commander whispered, They are still with us. Her voice did not break, it grew heavier, like stone rolling into place. Outside, the invaders did not slow, their craft circled tighter, and one by one their beams began to sweep toward the underground shelters. The officer shouted coordinates into the transmitter, attaching the location of the hiding civilians. His hands shook as he sent it. Then another line appeared on the display, simple but chilling: civilians secured, reinforce interior. The officer blinked, confused, because there were no human boots on their soil, not yet. And yet the word secured glowed bright as a vow. Suddenly deep below them, tunnels shook with a different thunder, not enemy fire, but something that cracked the ground from beneath. Survivors in the shelters gasped as dust fell from ceilings. Then light shone through fissures in the rock, not the red light of fire, but white like lightning caught in a jar. A small boy whispered, "The sky is coming underground." Above, the circle in the clouds thickened with a strange gleam, a ripple like oil over water. The commander knew then that something vast was about to arrive. She did not smile. She only set her jaw and ordered, "Keep the signal steady. Let them find us." And the officer obeyed, though his heart raced with a new kind of fear, not of the invaders, but of what might answer their call. Silence stretched again. But this silence did not feel empty. It felt heavy, like a mountain leaning over them, and in that weight, the first true sign appeared. A shadow larger than the city itself sliding across the broken sky, so immense that even the enemy craft paused their hunt. The shadow blocked the fires, and for the first time since the siege began, darkness returned to the city, not from destruction, but from something greater standing above. The shadow grew darker, stretching over the ruins like a vast wing. The fires of the burning city dimmed beneath it, and every pair of eyes, soldier, civilian, invader, lifted upward. Silence clung to the world for one long heartbeat before the ground quaked. Not from enemy fire this time, but from the sheer weight of the thing above. The officer at the console stared through the shattered glass of the control room, his hands hovering over dead keys. He could not find words, only the thought that the old stories had been true. The commander narrowed her eyes as the shadow shifted, and then from the circle in the clouds broke a shape, black metal glistening, longer than mountains, wider than valleys. A ship that looked less built and more carved from the bones of night itself. Its hull carried scars older than their planet, symbols etched in languages none of them knew. It moved with slow power, as if the void itself parted for it, and behind it more shapes followed, smaller only by comparison, each one bristling with angles, weapons that glowed faint blue, lines of light crawling like veins. The aliens in the city dropped to their knees, not from reverence, but from the crushing weight of awe. The invaders froze in their advance. Their spidery walkers halted mid-step, their beams cut off as commanders inside realized what had come. The officer looked back at the console, his signal still repeating, and a new line appeared on the screen: message received, position locked, enemy identified, engagement commencing. The words struck like thunder in the chest, and before he could breathe, the sky lit with a single lance of white fire. It fell from the human dreadnought and tore through an enemy carrier in orbit. The vessel shattered into molten fragments before it even had time to scream across comms. The commander's lips tightened, not with joy, but with grim knowledge. These were not rescuers. These were executioners. Below, invader units scrambled, their formations breaking as panic finally entered their iron discipline. One walker tried to retreat, but another bolt of light carved it open like fruit. Its pieces rained into the streets. Civilians screamed and covered their heads, but when they looked again, they saw the humans did not aim at them. The fire was precise, it was ruthless. Every beam hunted invader craft and ignored the weak. The officer whispered, "They came." The words sounded small compared to the storm building above. Then the sky split again. This time not with a single shot but with a chorus. The Deathworlder fleet unleashed. Volleys of searing energy fell like rain. Enemy ships folded, cracked, and vanished into ash, and each strike shook the bones of the world itself. Yet still the human ships moved in silence. No cheers. No songs, only fury, cold and endless. The commander finally spoke, her voice low, steady, heavy. "Never forget this sight. They did not come as friends. They came as wrath." And in her words every soul in the room felt the same shiver. For though they were saved, they had also called down something far greater than they had ever feared. The storm in the heavens did not end. It only grew. The human warships spread across the sky like a wall of night. their weapons carving streaks of fire so bright. They burned after images into the eyes of anyone watching. Invader fleets tried to scatter, some dove into the planet's atmosphere, others tried to flee toward the edge of space, but the Deathworlders hunted with cold patience. One by one the enemy ships were caught and erased, each explosion silent in the airless void yet shaking the ground below as shockwaves rippled through the thin atmosphere. The people of Cash Prime huddled in their shelters, their fear of the invaders now tangled with something new, or so heavy it felt like chains. In the control room the officer's hands never left the console, though now he was no longer sending for help, he was only watching. The screen filled with status updates from an unknown human system. Cold lines of text that spoke with machine certainty. Enemy losses confirmed, orbital superiority established. Ground interference units deploying. He whispered the words aloud without realizing, his throat dry, ground interference. The commander turned toward the shattered windows just as the first human drop craft pierced the cloud circle. They did not fall like fragile shuttles. They slammed down like meteors, their hulls wrapped in burning plasma. Their landing left craters in streets already ruined. Hatches burst open and shapes emerged. Figures taller than any Cash soldier, armored in black that gleamed like obsidian wet with blood. Their faces hidden behind mirrored visors. Their steps so heavy the ground seemed to groan. Civilians who saw them whispered old words. Deathwalkers, steel ghosts, nightmare men. Yet the invaders broke faster than civilians did. Spidery war machines turned their beams on the new arrivals. But the beams bent and scattered across the armor. Humans moved forward without slowing, weapons in their hands barking thunder. Every shot tore invaders apart as if the universe itself had chosen sides. The officer leaned forward, his heart pounding. Part of him wanted to cheer, part of him wanted to flee. Because the humans did not fight like soldiers, they fought like storms, relentless and merciless. The commander's voice was steady. Do not mistake them for saviors. They are a force we called upon, outside. The battlefield had become something no story had ever captured. Invader machines collapsed in heaps, alien warriors screamed and scattered, and through the fire the human boots kept marching, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. The people of Cash Prime realized then that they would live, but they also realized something darker. Survival came not because of mercy, but because of fury, and that truth was heavier than the ruins of their city. The city had become a furnace of fire and thunder, yet within that chaos there was a strange order. The invaders no longer pressed forward, they fled, their sleek black craft lifting from burning streets only to be torn apart in the sky by human fire. The Deathworlder ships moved like predators, precise, silent, efficient, and each time one of their weapons spoke, another enemy life was ended. In the shelters deep below the ground, civilians clutched each other, listening to the unnatural roars above. Some prayed, some wept, some simply sat in silence, but all felt the same question burn inside them. What price would this rescue demand? In the control room the officer wiped ash from the console screen. His eyes locked on the human data streams pouring in. Coded reports flashed across in sharp mechanical lines. Enemy eradication proceeding. Resistance minimal. Planetfall secure. Reinforcement. Waves en route. Every update was like a hammer pounding away the last traces of doubt. These humans were not improvising. They were not fighting desperately. They were executing a plan as if they had done this 100 times before. The commander watched with hard eyes. Her jaw clenched. She understood what many did not. There was no warmth in these transmissions, no comfort, only the mathematics of war. Outside, in the broken avenues of the city, human soldiers advanced in squads, their armor glinting in the flames. They moved through rubble like ghosts of iron. They did not pause to speak. They did not comfort the wounded. They only hunted. Their weapons spat arcs of light that shredded the last of the invader walkers. And when resistance ended in one street, they turned as one body and marched to the next. The officer's heart ached with the sight, not because of the enemy's fall, but because of the way the humans seemed untouched by it, as if each death was just another stone laid in a road they had been walking all their lives. In the distance, the largest invader craft tried to lift from the industrial quarter, its engines shaking the ground. It carried enough weapons to level the rest of the city. Hope flickered in enemy ranks as they rallied to it. But the hope lasted only seconds. A single human dreadnought angled its massive hull, and from its core a beam wider than a river cut downward. The invader flagship dissolved into dust before its shadow even passed from the ground. The shockwave rolled through the city, shattering glass, breaking stone. But when the fire cleared, only the human fleet remained, unchallenged, unbent. The commander placed both hands on the table and whispered words no one wanted to hear. "This is not rescue. This is judgment." And the officer felt those words carved deep into his chest, because as much as he wanted to believe in salvation, the truth stood in fire outside the windows. Earth's Deathworlders had not come as saviors. They had come as fury, and fury cared little for the world it burned to ash. The streets of Cash Prime were no longer filled with the enemy. They were filled with echoes. Fire hissed from broken pipelines, smoke curled through shattered windows, and the sound of human boots striking stone was steady as a drumbeat. Survivors peeked from shelters, trembling at the sight of the figures outside. These warriors were unlike anything they had imagined. Their armor was black as void, marked with glowing sigils that pulsed like living veins. Their weapons carried a heat that shimmered in the air. Each step they took seemed to make the ground itself obey. Invaders who had once appeared unstoppable now lay broken, their machines reduced to twisted husks, their bodies scattered like fallen leaves after a storm. Yet the humans showed no triumph, no mercy. Their mirrored visors never lifted, their movements never faltered. They swept through the city block by block, erasing any trace of resistance. In the control room the officer could hardly breathe. His signal still repeated, but now there was no need. The humans had arrived. Their fleet had locked the skies. Their soldiers had claimed the ground. Still he kept the transmission alive, afraid that if he stopped the message, the humans might stop too. The commander stood still, watching the storm outside with unreadable eyes. She whispered low so only he heard, "Remember this, they do not fight for us. They fight because it is their nature, and her." Words coiled inside his mind like a cold truth. In the southern quarter a group of civilians tried to crawl from a collapsed shelter. Their bodies coated in dust, their faces streaked with tears. When a human squad passed, the civilians froze, afraid even to breathe. One child whimpered and the sound seemed to pierce the silence like glass. The humans turned, weapons raised. Then after a pause they lowered them and moved on, leaving behind a silence thicker than before. The survivors did not cheer, they did not thank. They only stared in stunned terror as the giants vanished into the smoke. The officer watched new lines crawl across his console. Engagement complete, enemy eradicated, secondary objectives pending. He read the words aloud, and every syllable felt heavier than the last. Secondary objectives. What did that mean? His mouth went dry. The commander gave no answer. She simply turned her gaze to the sky where the dreadnoughts hung like executioners' blades. The invaders were gone, but the humans remained, and in their silence the city felt smaller, weaker, fragile as glass beneath a storm cloud. The officer realized then that survival was not victory. It was only the beginning of whatever price would come next, and that thought filled him with a fear deeper than the invasion itself. The night stretched on, but the sky did not return to normal. The human fleet still loomed above, blotting out stars, their dreadnoughts hovering like black mountains that had learned to float. Every survivor in Cash Prime felt their presence pressing down on them, heavier than the ruins around them. On the ground the human soldiers continued their sweep, their boots leaving prints in ash. They moved through every sector with precision, scanning, searching, and clearing. Though the invaders had been destroyed, the Deathworlders acted as if the battle was still alive. Their discipline unnerving in its silence, they did not speak, not even to each other, only brief gestures and the cold hum of their weapons. In the control room the officer's console flickered again with new text. Population secured, enemy eliminated, awaiting further directive. He read the words aloud, and the silence that followed was more suffocating than the smoke. The commander's face hardened. She knew what it meant. The humans were not done. They were waiting for orders, orders that might decide the fate of her entire people. Outside, civilians began to emerge, cautious and trembling. They stepped into streets lit by fire and broken glass. Many dropped to their knees. Some raised their hands in surrender though no weapon was pointed at them. Mothers pulled children close as they passed the human squads. But the soldiers did not react. They marched forward like statues carved for war. One man dared to shout thank you. His voice cracked with gratitude and desperation. But the humans did not answer. They did not even glance at him. They vanished into the haze as if the words had never been spoken. The officer pressed his palms into the console, his heart hammering. He wanted to believe they were saved. Yet every second the humans remained silent. Every moment their fleet blocked out the stars. made salvation feel like a question, not an answer. Suddenly the main screen flared, a new transmission forcing itself across all channels. It was not the officer's message repeating, it was a reply. Human script crawling in sharp lines, single phrase translated and repeated until the screen shook with it. Maintain position, judgment incomplete. The commander whispered the words, and her voice was more fearful now than it had ever been during the invasion. Judgment incomplete. She repeated, and the officer felt the blood drain from his face. They had called for help, and help had come. But now he realized that humans did not simply fight enemies. They measured worlds, and the fate of Cash Prime still hung in their cold, steady hands. The fires across Cash Prime dimmed into embers. The night no longer roared with invasion but with the silence of something worse, the silence of judgment. The human fleet hung above the planet like a curtain of iron, blotting out the stars. Their dreadnoughts moved only slightly, but every motion felt like the shifting of gods. Below, the ruined streets carried new sounds. The steady metallic echo of armored boots, the crackle of broken stone under weight, the occasional hiss of a weapon discharging to finish what little resistance dared to move. The invaders were gone, nothing left of them but twisted husks and black smoke curling into the broken skyline. Yet the humans did not stand down. They did not celebrate. They did not speak to the people they had saved. Their mirrored helmets reflected flames but no humanity. Their weapons hummed like the heartbeats of machines, and everywhere they marched they left behind a feeling heavier than fear. In the control room the officer sat stiff, his eyes bloodshot, staring at the console that no longer carried his own message but only theirs. Maintain position, judgment incomplete. The words pulsed across the screen in cold rhythm. Each repetition felt like a hammer. The commander stood near the shattered windows, her hands clasped behind her back, her body strong though her shoulders shook ever so slightly. She whispered more to herself than to anyone else. They are measuring us, and the words made the officer's stomach turn. The civilians began to emerge from the shelters, some limped, some carried the injured. All looked upward as if afraid the sky itself might strike them. Children pointed at the dreadnoughts with wide eyes. Elders muttered old legends that were never meant to be true. Many dropped to their knees in the streets, some in worship, some in surrender. A few even dared to shout thank you into the smoky air. But the humans gave no answer. Their soldiers swept past them as if they were ghosts in the rubble, weapons still raised, visors unreadable. One soldier paused for a moment when a child stumbled before him, the child's small hand reaching out. But instead of taking it, the soldier simply stepped aside, silent, leaving the child to be gathered by his mother. The officer saw this on the surveillance feed and his chest tightened. These were not saviors. These were storms wearing flesh. Outside, the ground quaked again, not from invaders this time, but from human dropships landing in formation. Each slammed into the earth with enough force to shake entire districts. More soldiers poured out, their black armor gleaming against the firelight, their formation perfect, endless lines of disciplined fury. The officer felt the air grow colder though the fires burned hot. He turned back to the commander, his voice breaking. What do they want from us? She answered with silence, because she already knew the answer was not mercy. The console buzzed again. New text spilling across the screen. Resource assessment in progress, compliance recommended, population review pending. The officer read it aloud without meaning to, his voice echoing in the dead room, every word like a nail. Compliance recommended, population review pending. Suddenly the survivors outside felt eyes on them though no visor moved. They began to whisper in panic. What does it mean? What are they reviewing? The commander clenched her fists, her voice steady though cold. They are deciding if we are worth sparing. The officer's heart sank into his stomach. He realized then that their rescue had never been about kindness. It had been about choice. The humans had chosen to answer, chosen to destroy their enemies, and now they would choose again. Whether Cash Prime itself would continue. Above, the largest dreadnought shifted, its belly opening to reveal lines of glowing structures, weapons or tools, no one could tell. The sight alone made crowds scream and scatter into the rubble though there was nowhere to hide. The officer pressed his hands to the console, his breath ragged. If they choose against us, nothing will remain. The commander placed her hand on his shoulder, her voice low. Do not beg, do not plead, only stand. Because they do not answer weakness, they only respect survival. The officer looked into her eyes and saw no comfort there, only the truth. The humans had come in fury, and fury did not give without taking. the night stretched heavy. The survivors of Cash Prime held their breath under the gaze of giants, and in the silence that followed, they understood something deeper than fear. The galaxy did not belong to those who prayed for help. It belonged to those who answered, and Earth's Deathworlders had answered with fire. Now they waited to see if they would answer with mercy.